Hello friends. Today we will talk about keying. That's color keying and also LumaKey or Luminance key. So I'll dive in to this shot on green screen, and the first thing to note is that usually we think of this as removing green when we key a shot like this, but actually it's not entirely precise. What we're actually doing is creating a mask or a matte for the foreground that will exclude the green. So if I grab a key light, plug it into the source, plug this into the source. I'm just going to view this. Go to my screen color over here, grab the color box, and come over here and hold Command. I'll choose the color that I want to key. Just go right here for now. And if I go to A and view the alpha channel, I'll see that a new alpha channel is being created for this image. And I'll just go back here. And if I go back to my color picker, my goal here will be to isolate the foreground and completely remove this. So one tip is to get in closer actually to the object and select color from there. And now you can see that more of this has been keyed. But actually, before doing that, this here you can see is a lot of green to worry about. And the problem with that is that throughout the screen there are actually different shades of green. The keyer wants to remove one shade of green, but when there are shadows and different sorts of details happening here, these are actually all different greens. So that's why it's not going to remove it perfectly. So to give yourself the best chance, the first thing to do is actually just crop out the parts that you know that will not be used, and also the parts of the set that don't belong here. So that's what I've done over here. If I click on this rotoplane over here, hold on. You can see that right away I can say, you know what, I don't need this stuff up here, I don't need this stuff over here, I don't need this. You would just make basically 4 rectangles to cut out what you don't need. And in this case, there is already an input in the key light node, this out M. And what you can do is down here in your key light, in the out M component, you just need to make sure that that is set to alpha to make sure that it's using the alpha information of whatever is going into this in order to create that mask. Okay. And the old-fashioned way would be to use an out node, actually a merge node that is set to out. You could also do that out here separately so you can more easily control and see what you're doing. The key light is just a tool. Everything doesn't have to be done inside of this. So first step, you would do this is called a garbage mat or garbage mask. Just get rid of the garbage components that you can just throw away right away. Yeah. And then after you do that, you'll want to start looking at your shot against your background right away, just to get a sense of what's working and what's not. But we'll dive into a little bit more of the tools here. Things that you'll notice, if I go back over here to the alpha channel, I notice that this is not actually perfect. You'll see that there's some values here that are not fully opaque. If it's not completely white, that means it's not fully opaque. And like up here. So those are things that will need to be fixed. In other shots, you'll notice that there might also be holes in the mask. There could be black spots in here. This is sort of going in that direction, or there could be white spots in the black areas. But we have tools for that. If we go into the key lights and go to the screen matte, you'll see features like D-spot black or D-spot white. So you can say, well, there are spots in the white, so I can D-spot that. And if I crank this up, you'll see that it tries to even that out. This is not necessarily perfect demo to demonstrate like all of the errors that could possibly happen, how to fix them. But it's fairly intuitive. And the other thing you can do in Nuke, remember, is that if you hover over any parameter, it will tell you what it's for. So now, actually, for D-spot white, if I crank this up, let's see, yeah, we can see that this is trying to like dilate or erode my pixels. If I do it for either, yeah, but there's actually a dilate. Yeah, these nodes actually exist separately. Let's see what happens if I do this. Yeah, so this will grow or shrink the pixels. So what Keylight is doing is it's packaging all of these things that you can already do into the Keylight. It can get confusing if you manipulate a whole bunch of things inside of a Keylight and then you're not sure exactly what you've done or how you can fix that problem without going in and reading parameters. But if you do things separately outside of it and then basically think of this as a process of building up a mat rather than the complication of just doing a Keylight node, you can see everything that you're doing more easily and potentially manipulate it more easily too, and more accurately. Just wanted to highlight that. Another thing with the green screen, just go back to this. You know, there are all these technical tools to help you fix it, but you want it to be, you know, as perfect as it can possibly be before you get into Nuke. You want to shoot this properly in production if you're shooting your own shot or if you're supervising. One thing you can do is, if you cannot avoid these different values and things happening across the green screen, one thing you can do in camera is decrease your f-stop. So what that does is it will, if your screen is uneven, I'm just going to zoom in, if you decrease your f-stop, it will defocus the screen. So it will even out those greens. So I'm just going to slide that down. So there's a few different greens over here. If I defocus, see that evens out and it will key more easily. So if you set your f-stop to like 4.0, then you should have pretty good results. But more tips for shooting: you want to light the green screen separately. You want it to be lit as evenly as possible, probably with keynotes, and then light the foreground after you are done lighting the screen. And then light the foreground probably with 3-point lighting. It just depends on the situation. Let's see. I can see that. Also, you know, your subject might cast shadows onto your green screen. So another tip is to hopefully have enough space to place them 6 to 12 feet away from the screen itself. Right. You'll also see blue screen sometimes. If you're outdoors, a blue screen is more likely to get evened out outdoors because daylight is already blue, so it will play nice with you in that way. Of course, make sure that no one in the foreground is wearing green. Be careful of dangling jewelry and things of that nature, or frizzy hair, things that could just interfere with the key and get really complicate fine details of trying to pull a key. Let's see. Okay, so here you see I've labeled this out foreground because eventually I'll put it onto a background. I have out BG. So after you have a nice mask or a matte, you will need to color correct the foreground, because if you've removed the green, something might actually happen to this, which is that it could start turning a little bit red. You can see it more here. And again, this is just for the sake of demo. It's not a perfect key or anything, but because it could take hours, take a week. So Next, what you want to do is color correct, probably de-spill. So spill is what happens when, second, just going to get rid of this defocus. Spill is what happens when light bounces off of the screen and onto your subject, and then the edge of your subject catches some of that green light, and it's really hard to remove just by keying. So in that case, you will have to introduce red into your image via color correction in order to neutralize that green that's coming in on the edge. But something else, it depends on the shot. Something else could happen, which is that, okay, you pull the key pretty nicely, but then everything sort of turns red because of how you sort of remove the green. So you'll have to make that judgment call. Sometimes, if something is only happening in the edge, well, how do you control the edge? We have filters for that. So one of them is an edge detect filter. So if I put an edge detect on here, it is exactly what it sounds like. It has detected the edge, and this, again, these are just black and white pixels. It can be used as a mask for whatever you want. So you can actually color correct within the mask that is extracted from the edges of your object or your subject. This is also frequently used for blur. Something you might see often is edge detect and then blur, which is might be done on CG objects because CG objects often come out too sharp. Also, you might find that you just need more of a blurred edge. No need to overcomplicate that. What's happening here is that you're creating a matte. And if you need it to be more blurred, just blur the matte. if you need an edge blur sometimes it's not that complicated. And I like to do things outside of the key light, find most of what you need inside the key light. It's up to you. Okay. Another thing about, well, let's see, I'm just going to show you this little hack that I did. You'll notice that there's shadows here, but they're not quite right, are they? And if you're in a situation where you're shooting 2D and you just don't have those elements that you need, you have to create them probably in 2D. So what I've done here is I took all of this and copied the entire key, pasted it over here, but you'll see that I extracted the alpha information, reformatted this so that it's flipped and flopped. In the transform, I used, let's see, skew to make it look like it's stretching down across on the ground. Blur it, of course, because it's a shadow, and depending on the light direction, the time of day, you might need to do the blur more or less, or stretch these shadows more or less. Here I have a nuke node labeling it's my shadow coming out, and this is being, the way I create the shadow on the ground is that I want to color correct the ground, the brightness, down inside of this mask. So here in the grade, you'll see I used gain for brightness because I don't want to alter the color. There are no black shadows. Shadows are not black. Shadows will be the color of whatever the object is that the shadow is being cast on. It's just darker. So for darker, I have hue, saturation, and value. I just want to turn down the value, and in that case, it's the gain or the brightness. So there's my shadow. Sometimes in visual effects, you'll receive 3D objects from renders, and sometimes there might be missing shadows. You might have to create something like this out of CG objects. Okay. So now, something I keep mentioning how you can do things outside of the key light. You can build any tool from scratch. So if I grab this green screen shot, I just want to highlight this about keying and about all things in compositing. If I stare at this and I say, I want to make a mask excluding the green. You know what? Essentially what I could do is grab the green channel itself. And then, you know what, I need this, if I'm creating a mask, I need this to be, I need to isolate this. I need the contrast or the luminance values to be manipulated. And this is where I will use this as an opportunity to show you Luma key or luminance key. So here, I get the keyer node, the luminance key. Oh, I have to be viewing the alpha channel. Remember that. In order to see what the Luma key does, you have to be viewing the alpha channel. The Luma key is just like a contrast node or a curves or a histogram. It manipulates luminance, but the difference is that it turns it into alpha information. So here, it's just like adjusting the black point and the white point. So let's see, I want to isolate these characters. I'm going to go like that. I'm going to bring this down. Now they're isolated. But I need the opposite. This is giving me like an opposite mask. So I have an invert button here, but if I do that, I won't be able to see what I did. And if I have a lot of nodes in my comp, I'm going to forget that I checked that little box. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to use an actual invert node. And boom, we have exactly the same thing, basically, as what happened with the key light. So you can actually build your own keyer. And blur it so that it integrates well with the shot. We mentioned D-spotting and different holes being in the matte. Another thing you can do is actually create a mask or a matte that's better for the core and leave the edges alone. And then do another key light to focus more on the edges, and then combine them with a max node, just like you would with roto shapes. If you were to make multiple roto shapes, you can. It's called cascading keys, where you can stack your keys like that. Okay. Cool. So that is color key and luminance key.